He didn't blink, not once. When Hannibal Lecter first appeared on screen standing still, smiling, staring, it wasn't just a character introduction. It was a warning, a quiet kind of violence that seeps under your skin. The Silence of the Lambs wasn't made to entertain. It was designed to disturb, and it succeeded so thoroughly, in fact, that even after winning 5 Academy Awards, the film still leaves viewers with a residue they can't quite scrub off. But what if the real horror wasn't on the screen? What if the scariest parts were the ones they left out, the unfilmed scenes, the stories behind the camera, the secrets buried in the script? From unnerving audition tapes to method acting that went too far, from real-world killers that inspired Buffalo Bill to a cutscene that Jodie Foster herself called too disturbing to ever release, this film is crawling with facts darker than the plot itself. Some of them are haunting, some are absurd. All of them will make you look at this film in a way you never have before. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about The Silence of the Lamb. Fact Hasson: the monster was barely there. Anthony Hopkins won an Oscar for playing Hannibal Lecter. But here's what most people forget. He was on screen for just 16 minutes. In a 118-minute film, that's less than 14% of the runtime. And yet, his presence dominates the entire narrative. He doesn't run, doesn't raise his voice, and barely moves. But every time he appears, it feels like time stops and danger breathes closer. Director Jonathan Demme used a radical technique, having Lecter stare directly into the lens. It breaks the fourth wall, yes, but more than that, it forces the audience into submission. You're not watching Lecter, he's watching you. What makes this eerie is that Hopkins calculated every blink, every breath. He based Lecter's stillness on reptiles, predators, that stay absolutely motionless before they strike. He also studied HAL 9000 from 2001, A Space Odyssey, for emotional detachment. And yet, it's the brevity of his appearance that gives Lecter his mythic weight. He doesn't overstay, he haunts. What does it say about us that the most terrifying character in film history barely had to speak? Fact #2. The audition tape that terrified everyone. Before he got the role, Ted Levine, who played Buffalo Bill, submitted a private audition tape. It wasn't shown to the full casting team. Only a select few viewed it, and most of them wished they hadn't. The tape was raw, disturbing, and far too realistic. Levine reportedly improvised the infamous tuck scene, speaking in a tone that made the room go cold. No music, no edits, just him, a mirror, and something deeply unsettling in his eyes. The tape was so convincing that producers worried it might typecast him forever as a psychopath. For years after the film's release, Levine struggled to land roles. Even directors admitted they couldn't unsee what they saw. That audition, now considered legendary in Hollywood, has never been made public. It exists somewhere but remains under lock and key, with no official clips ever released. Was it too convincing? Or was it something else entirely? Something we were never meant to see? Fact #3. Buffalo Bill wasn't just one killer. The character of Buffalo Bill wasn't inspired by one serial killer. He was a terrifying amalgamation of many. Screenwriter Ted Talley and author Thomas Harris pulled traits from Ed Gein, who skinned victims, Ted Bundy, who faked injuries to lure women, and Gary Heidnik, who held victims captive in a pit. The result was a monster that felt too real because he was. Buffalo Bill's behavior was a Frankenstein patchwork stitched from human horror. The skin suit? Gein. The voice and manipulative charm? Bundy. The well in the basement? Heidnik. It wasn't artistic liberty, it was research. But what makes this more disturbing is that the FBI cooperated in building his profile. They provided real case files to help craft Buffalo Bill's psychology. The goal wasn't to create a fantasy villain, it was to mirror what exists in the real world. So when you watched Buffalo Bill, did you see a character? Or a warning? Fact #4. Lecter's eyes were lit like a demon's. It's easy to miss, but once you notice it, you can't unsee it. Hannibal Lecter's eyes seemed to glow in certain scenes. This wasn't an accident. Cinematographer Tak Fujimoto and director Jonathan Demme made a calculated decision to light Lecter from below, instead of the usual overhead setup. This technique, often called monster lighting, is rarely used in dramas, but here it created a subtle, inhuman effect, like his face was glowing from some inner fire. In the cell scene with Clarice, the shadows disappear from Lecter's face. His skin looks unnatural. His pupils reflect light in a way that feels wrong. More chilling? The lighting crew used reflected white boards below his chin to bounce light upward, the same method used in horror films to mimic demonic possession. It's barely noticeable at first, but once you realize it, Lecter doesn't look calm anymore. He looks possessed. Was this Hannibal? or something else staring through him? Fact-5. The moth was a message. The Death's head hawk moth isn't just a creepy insect. In The Silence of the Lambs, it's a coded symbol both for Buffalo Bill's obsession and something deeper. The real insect features a skull-like marking on its thorax. That's why it's been tied to death in European folklore for centuries. But for the film, the crew went further. The moth's metamorphosis became a metaphor for transformation, mirroring Buffalo Bill's warped desire to become someone else by literally changing his skin. But there's a detail most miss. In the original poster, the skull on the moth's back isn't a drawing, it's a recreation of In Voluptas Mors, a surrealist photograph by Salvador Dali featuring 7 naked women arranged to form a skull. It's hidden in plain sight, art, death, sex, and horror compressed into a single image no bigger than a thumbnail. How many layers of meaning can hide inside a single wing beat? Fact-6. Jodie Foster heard the lambs, screaming for real. The title, The Silence of the Lambs, is metaphorical, or so we thought. In interviews, Jodie Foster revealed that during one of the intense interrogation scenes with Lecter, her anxiety wasn't just acting. In fact, during one particular take, she claims to have heard lambs screaming in her head as if her character's trauma had momentarily bled into her own psyche. The film had taken a toll. The psychological pressure of confronting Lecter's cold, analytical cruelty while staying in character left Foster deeply unsettled. She began to associate the set with a sense of dread, and sometimes, she said, she couldn't tell if she was Clarice or herself. Foster only shared this years later, after saying she needed time to process what that role took out of me. When a performance echoes beyond the screen, does it stop being fiction? Fact-7. The cell was designed to trap you too. Hannibal Lecter's glass cell wasn't part of the original book. In the novel, Lecter is behind traditional bars, but Jonathan Demme wanted something more confrontational. So he removed the barrier. Instead of bars, Lecter's cell was built with thick plexiglass, invisible to the camera. That meant when Lecter looked at Clarice or at you, there was nothing in between. No physical obstruction, no distance, just eyes on eyes. Demme's logic? If the audience feels safe behind bars, they'll feel like observers. I want them to feel like victims. The glass also let the camera move freely, allowing for tight, symmetrical close-ups. Lecter didn't feel contained. He felt caged, but still in control, like a tiger that chooses not to pounce. Was this a prison or a mirror? Fact-8. Hopkins and Foster barely spoke off camera. You'd think that working on such intense scenes together would build a bond. But in reality, Anthony Hopkins and Jodie Foster barely spoke off-camera by design. Foster later confessed she was terrified of him, not the man, but the character. Hopkins had slipped into Lecter so completely that she avoided him between takes, even during lunch. And Hopkins? He used that fear. He remained cold, distant, polite, but never friendly. The tension you see between Clarice and Lecter? It wasn't acting. It was survival instinct, captured on film. When the film wrapped, Foster thanked him and Hopkins broke character for the first time, saying, "You were wonderful." They laughed. But even then, Foster admitted, "Part of me didn't fully relax until I left the set." Sometimes the best performances are the ones that never fully end. Fact-9. Real FBI agents were watching. What many viewers don't realize is that The Silence of the Lambs wasn't just a thriller, it was a recruitment tool. During pre-production, director Jonathan Demme and writer Ted Talley worked closely with the FBI. They were granted access to Quantico, real case files, and even profiling techniques. But the cooperation had a catch. The Bureau wanted Clarice Starling to be portrayed as a strong, intelligent role model to help attract more women into law enforcement. After the film's release, the FBI reported a notable uptick in female recruits, many of whom cited Starling as their inspiration. Behind the horror, behind the blood, was a carefully orchestrated PR strategy. In fact, real FBI agents attended the film's premiere not as guests, but as observers, curious to see how the public would respond to their rebranded image. Was this just a movie or a mirror designed to change society? Fact-0. The script was rewritten in real time. Most viewers assume the film followed a locked script. It didn't. Ted Talley, the screenwriter, was rewriting scenes as filming progressed, sometimes just hours before the shoot. Why? Because Demme kept adjusting the emotional tone, wanting more ambiguity, less exposition, and more silence. One example, Lecter's chilling line, "I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti." Originally, it was longer, clinical, explanatory. Talley cut it down. Hopkins added the slurping hiss as an unscripted moment. That noise, it wasn't written anywhere. It just happened. Everyone on set froze. Foster later said, "It felt like someone had punched the air out of the room." These micro adjustments, day by day, gave the film a raw, unpredictable energy. It felt alive and dangerously unstable. Would the film have worked if everything had gone according to plan? Fact, Hassonon. Clarice's silence was strategic. Jodie Foster's portrayal of Clarice Starling is remembered for her quiet strength. But here's the twist. The silence was deliberate and trained. Before filming, Foster met with real FBI trainees. She learned that women agents were taught to listen more than speak, to observe body language, and to let suspects fill the silence out of discomfort. This wasn't about being passive, it was about power. In a world dominated by male energy, Clarice's restraint became a weapon. Watch how she holds eye contact, how she waits through pauses. The stillness becomes pressure, and when she finally does speak, it lands like a hammer. Every line is sharpened by everything she doesn't say. Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes, it's the sharpest blade in the room. Fact Hassan 2. The real Lecter was already in prison? In crafting Hannibal Lecter, author Thomas Harris wasn't inventing from thin air. He had met someone, a doctor, in prison. In the 1,960 seconds, Harris interviewed an incarcerated surgeon known only as Dr. Salazar while researching a different case. Salazar was calm, eloquent, polite, and had a reputation among inmates for giving brilliant medical advice. Despite being a convicted killer, Harris never revealed the real name, but the impression stuck. The combination of civility, education, and brutality became the core of Hannibal Lecter. Years later, journalists attempted to uncover Salazar's identity. Some believe he was a pseudonym for Alfredo Bailly Trevino, a Mexican doctor convicted of dismembering his lover. He died in 2009, still mysterious, still polite. Maybe Lecter was fiction, but his smile? That was real. Fact Hasson 3. The music was built to deceive you. You probably didn't notice it, but that was the point. Howard Shore's score for The Silence of the Lambs was designed to lull the viewer into vulnerability. Instead of using sharp stings or dramatic cues, Shore composed long, droning melodies that slowly crawled under your skin. At moments of tension, the music doesn't rise. It lowers. It hums beneath the scene like an unconscious thought, allowing the terror to feel unannounced, unprepared. Even the iconic escape sequence, Lecter's Cage Massacre, is scored with music that sounds almost tragic, not thrilling. It's disorienting, beautiful, even, as if the soundtrack sympathizes with the monster. The genius of it? Shore created a sonic contradiction, tension wrapped in elegance. You never hear fear approaching. It's already there. What if horror doesn't scream, but whispers? Fact Hasson 4. The real-life suit that inspired the horror. Buffalo Bill's infamous woman suit wasn't entirely fictional. It came from a case that still unsettles seasoned investigators. Ed Gein, the killer who inspired both Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, was arrested in 1957. When police searched his Wisconsin home, they discovered something grotesque. A suit made from female skin, stitched together from multiple victims. Gein wasn't trying to be a woman, he was trying to become his mother, whom he worshipped obsessively. The skin suit was part of a twisted ritual, an attempt at resurrection through transformation. Harris and Talley took this idea and restructured it not as necrophilia, but as identity dysmorphia pushed to its darkest edge. Buffalo Bill doesn't hate women, he wants to become one by wearing them. When does longing become madness? And how much of that madness do we recognize in ourselves? Fact Hasson 5. A scene so disturbing it was buried. There's a deleted scene that's been whispered about but never officially released. Even Jodie Foster admits it exists, but she won't describe it in detail. According to multiple sources on set, the scene involved a flashback, Clarice as a child, watching lambs being slaughtered. It was shot in harsh, documentary-style realism, using actual footage from a slaughterhouse. The idea was to make the metaphor literal to give the audience no distance from her trauma. But when they screened it, the reaction was instant. People looked away. Some walked out. Dem decided to cut it. The horror was no longer psychological, he said. It became cruelty. Today, that footage remains locked away, likely in a studio vault. It's not online, it's not on the DVD, but those who saw it still talk about it. What kind of truth is too disturbing to show even in a horror film? Fact Hashan X. The most famous line was improvised. It's etched into pop culture. Good evening, Clarice. People quote it, parody it, fear it. But here's the twist. Lecter never actually says it in the film. That exact phrase, word for word, doesn't appear in the final cut. What Anthony Hopkins does say is, "Good morning," or "Hello, Clarice," depending on the scene. But "Good evening, Clarice," that came later. According to interviews, Hopkins ad-libbed that line during behind-the-scenes recordings, possibly for promotional material. Somehow, it stuck, becoming the unofficial catchphrase of Hannibal Lecter in the public imagination. It's now quoted more than any actual line in the film. So, which version do you remember? The one that was said, or the one that felt true? Fact Hassan 7. The mirror was no accident. During Buffalo, Bill's infamous scene in front of the mirror wearing a robe, tucking his body, swaying, there's a detail that goes unnoticed. The way he holds eye contact with his own reflection. The mirror wasn't just a prop, it was a weapon. Director Jonathan Demme instructed actor Ted Levine to imagine he wasn't looking at himself but at an imagined version of who he wanted to become. The scene was shot with careful lighting and minimal direction, allowing Levine's improvisation to steer the moment. In psychological terms, the mirror becomes a portal of delusion. We're not just watching transformation, we're witnessing someone destroy their own identity in real time. Is it still a performance when the actor forgets he's acting? Fact Hassan 8. A silence that was engineered. The title isn't metaphorical, it's literal. In the sound design of The Silence of the Lambs, engineers created what they called unnatural quiet. During key scenes, especially when Clarice is alone or Lecter is about to speak, they removed background noise layer by layer. No humming, no air conditioning, no footsteps in the distance. This hyper-clean silence creates a sensation of pressure, like the world is holding its breath. Your brain expects ambient noise. When it's gone, the result is subtle but visceral. You lean in, you flinch more easily. It's not just cinematic silence, it's psychological manipulation. What do you hear when all the noise disappears? Fact Hassanin. The mask was custom, fitted to fear. One of the most iconic images in cinematic history. Lecter, strapped to a gurney, face bound by a brown muzzle-like mask. That mask wasn't just for show, it was engineered to evoke primal fear. The design team studied historical torture devices, animal muzzles, and facial restraint systems used in asylums during the 1,800 seconds. The result? A shape that looked like it was built to erase identity. But here's the unnerving part. The mask was custom molded to Hopkins' actual skull, ensuring a disturbingly snug fit. It allowed only mouth movement, not expression. The eyes remained visible, exposed, unblinking. In early versions, the mask covered more of the face, but the team realized that the more they revealed of Hopkins' eyes, the less human the mask looked. They struck the balance by opening it just enough to make Lecter appear both trapped and predatory. When you look at him, are you seeing someone restrained or someone about to break free? Fact #20. The ending wasn't supposed to be that chilling. "I'm having an old friend for dinner." It's the final line of the film, casual, elegant, and horrifying. But that wasn't the original plan. Early drafts ended with Lecter disappearing into the crowd, ambiguous and wordless. But test audiences wanted closure, something that felt like an echo of what came before. So the line was added last minute, based on a note scribbled by Hopkins himself. He pitched it as a joke. The crew laughed nervously. But when he delivered it on camera, in that calm, dispassionate voice, with the crowd of tourists walking past him unnoticed, it stopped being funny. Suddenly, the ending wasn't just an escape, it was a promise. Did Lecter walk away from the story? Or into yours? Bonus fact, the voice that wasn't human. There's something about Hannibal Lecter's voice that unsettles, even before he says anything terrifying. Anthony Hopkins didn't just speak the role, he engineered it. He worked with a dialect coach to eliminate emotional inflection, creating a tone that was flat but surgical. Then, he went further. He studied hypnotists, predators, and old tapes of cult leaders. He lowered his pitch slightly, then raised the resonance in his throat. The result? A voice that feels like it's not just talking to you, but inside you. One sound engineer described it as almost reptilian, vibrating in a frequency that your brain processes faster than normal speech. Some viewers report feeling drowsy, even tense, during Lecter's long monologue, like they're being guided somewhere darker. It wasn't an accident. Hopkins once said, "I wanted him to sound like someone who already knows everything about you." So the next time you hear that voice, ask yourself, is it Lecter, or is it something he woke up inside you? If one of these facts disturbed you more than the film itself, you're You're not alone. But here's the real question. Was Hannibal Lecter terrifying because of what he did, or because of how much you agreed with him? Tell us in the comments which facts stayed with you, and what film you want us to dissect next.